Oh, hello and welcome to What Are We Talking About with Jamie Jakes. I am him, and today I am going to reveal my guys going into 2024 fantasy football season. These guys I'm putting my name behind because I believe they are going to be absolute fantasy football smashes, and a few people disagree with me. So let's get right into it with my very first selection. Rookie for the Kansas City Chiefs, Xavier Worthy. And this one's been an easy one for me ever since the pre-draft process. And then when he was drafted by the Kansas City Chiefs, I was over the moon excited for it because I thought he was a great fit for the offense. But let's go into his player profile and see exactly all the boxes that Xavier Worthy checks and see if we can identify any red flags in his player profile. Now, these are extremely predictive metrics, meaning these metrics have been shown in history of fantasy football to predict the future in terms of fantasy football production. Early breakout age, Xavier Worthy checks this box. He actually broke a freshman receiving record at Texas. Yards per route run, we like to see over 2 yards per route run for the career of our prospects going into the NFL. Xavier Worthy also checks that box. Draft capital. How much did the team invest in the player? Xavier Worthy has elite draft capital. He's a first-round drafted player, and the Chiefs actually traded up to acquire him in a trade with the Bills. Premium landing spot. I could not think of a better landing spot for a speedy wide receiver than the Kansas City Chiefs. Obviously, Patrick Mahomes will push the ball down the field. That's what they wanted to do last year, and they couldn't because they didn't have Xavier Worthy on the team. Opportunity to start. Is he going to start on this team? We all saw Hollywood Brown in week 1 go down with his SC, his sternoclavicular injury in week 1, sent him to the hospital. He is going to miss the rest of the camp. He might be ready to start week 1. I doubt it. And honestly, I would predict that he would be eased into action with how well Xavier Worthy is performing in preseason and in camp. And finally, camp reports. Are the beat writers saying that Xavier Worthy is that guy? Is he running with the ones? Day 1, OTAs, he was the guy. He was running with the ones because the Chiefs spent that draft capital in him. He's getting the opportunity to work with Patrick Mahomes and build that chemistry early on. And now, just like we saw with Puka and Cooper Kupp last year, the guy who might have gotten in the way of his volume, his snap percentage early on in the season in Hollywood Brown, the field stretcher on the team, the only other field stretcher that they have on the roster on the offense, is out with an injury. So all things point towards Xavier Worthy absolutely booming in week 1 of the fantasy football season. And the only red flag on his player profile is that he's too fast. A lot of commentators said, look at all these other wide receivers, all these other prospects who had a blazing fast 40-yard dash time at the combine, and all of them, outside of maybe 1 or 2 of them, ended up being total busts, and none of them were really great hit home runs. And the big difference here is the other players in that list, none of them checked all of those boxes. None of them even would say checked even 2 of those boxes in terms of landing spot, opportunity to start, and college production, early breakout age that we have with Xavier Worthy. So he is the exception to the rule, if that is a rule that fast wide receivers don't succeed in the NFL. The only other red flag for real would be his size, but I think we've seen Devontae Smith and Tank Dell kind of prove that to not really be a major issue in the NFL. And a lot of people say, well, Rashee Rice is going to eat up a lot of those targets. I totally disagree. You can see a short on my channel that I released on Monday. I think Rashee Rice and Xavier Worthy are going to be force multipliers. I think Travis Kelce and Rashee Rice are going to eat up a lot of the short targets on the football field, and Xavier Worthy is going to stretch the field. So the defense is going to have to pick their poison. They're going to have to run for their lives and backpedal to clear up space for Travis Kelce and Rashee Rice down low. And once, twice, 3 times a game, we saw it a few times in the preseason already. If you give Xavier Worthy an absolute inch, he is going to take a mile. He's going to take a big score for a touchdown, 30-yard gain, 40-yard gain. And Patrick Mahomes isn't going to miss him like Quinn Ewers missed Xavier Worthy a lot on film deep down the field. So I have to put an honorable mention for this My Guy segment. Patrick Mahomes and Rashee Rice, I think, are spectacular values right now. I don't think Rashee Rice will be suspended. He will definitely be on my high-valued targets list later on in this season as we get closer to our fantasy football drafts. So I have to add those two. I think Mahomes is just going to throw for another 5,000 yards this season. And in Sleeper, you can actually pretty easily get Patrick Mahomes, Xavier Worthy, and Rashee Rice back to back to back, 4th, 5th, 6th round in these fantasy football drafts on the Sleeper platform. It's a highly overpowered stack, in my opinion, and something that you should be targeting if you have your drafts coming up soon. And for best ball, I think Xavier Worthy's even better because maybe he'll be inconsistent, but he's going to have those boom weeks where he catches a 70-yard touchdown or catches 3 30-yard passes from Patrick Mahomes and really booms for your team. Xavier Worthy currently going wide receiver 34 on Underdog. I envision him easily surpassing that, easily breaking into the top 24, being an easy wide receiver 2 pickup, which is a great value for where you're getting him. And on top of it, I think he has the ceiling of being a top 10, top 15 wide receiver, which brings me to number 2, Indianapolis Colts quarterback, Anthony Richardson. Now, the big red flag on his profile, and this is why I'm really putting my name behind him, is that he had a low sample size, got injured last year, and we don't really know how the season would have ended up. But and in games he played a full game in, just 2 of them. So there's a small sample size here. He was absolutely electric. With that being said, rookies, even CJ Stroud, took a few weeks for him to get rolling. Anthony Richardson seemed like he was ready to go week 1. And where you're getting him, he's currently going QB5 in best ball drafts and in pretty much all platforms. I think could be an absolute steal. And I am predicting that he will have an amazing breakout season and kind of break fantasy football. You'll be drafting him in the 2nd, 3rd round next year. Stable situation. Jonathan Taylor's back. Rookie head coach last year is now looking like he is an absolute dude, and he produced with some pretty mediocre talent last year in the quarterback position. Although Gardner Minshew, hey, got the starting job for the Raiders. So shout out to you over Aiden O'Connell. I think Anthony Richardson is going to be an improvement as a passer and obviously as a rusher. So I have to throw in Michael Pittman as my honorable mention here, and let me explain why. In that 2-game sample size, Anthony Richardson would have been projected to pass for 35.96 for passing yards, 26 passing touchdowns, 8 interceptions, 816 rushing yards, and 17 rushing touchdowns, which would bring his total fantasy points in 4-point passing leagues to 414 fantasy points in a 17-game season. Josh Allen, for example, last season got 410 fantasy football points and was a great value for where you were drafting him in like the 3rd round last year. So Anthony Richardson's ceiling is Josh Allen, QB1. It's pretty easy to paint that picture. Some of those games, those 2 games he played full go in, they were favorable matchups. They weren't all-star defenses by any means, but I think with a year of experience, a year in the program, and now a 2nd training camp under his belt, some preseason time, he's going to hit the ground running literally and score a whole bunch of fantasy points this year. Even if he struggles as a passer, he's still going to run the hell out of the football. I think that plus 800 rushing yard statistic is kind of locked in stone. I think the real question mark is how many passing yards is he going to throw for and how many touchdowns is he going to throw for. So that's what keeps Michael Pittman off of my list. But if you give Michael Pittman 35% target share, which I honestly think he will get, especially with Josh Downs being kind of out for the preseason and A.D. Mitchell maybe not being the prospect that a lot of people wanted him to be for the Indianapolis Colts. Jonathan Taylor, ready to go week 1. Michael Pittman, 35% target share for a 3,596-yard passer. That comes out to 1,258 and 9 touchdowns in that percentage of targets, which he got last year. I think more than 35% he got last year. Michael Pittman's ADP is currently wide receiver 23. That stat line would easily put him in the top 12 fantasy football assets, let alone wide receivers, into next year. He'll be drafted in the 1st round next year if he puts up that stat line in 17 games. Jonathan Taylor back for all the games this year. I think that's going to open up things more than it's going to close up things for Anthony Richardson. Maybe JT snipes a few rushing touchdowns from Anthony Richardson, or maybe he allows him to get more space, some RPO action, and score more touchdowns in the red zone. I think adding a superstar talent in Jonathan Taylor and a guy we have seen take screens for like 80 yards in the NFL, I think is an absolute positive for the offense and Anthony Richardson's fantasy football outlook this season. And finally, here's an easy one, I think, which is why he's my third my guy, Evan Ingram, tight end for the Jacksonville Jaguars. He was number 4 in total receptions for any receiver last season. So that's including running backs, that's including wide receivers. He was number 4 in receptions last year, and he was still top 10 in targets. Last season, he finished as the tight end 2 in half PPR scoring formats, and his ADP currently is tight end 8. Now, the big caveat on this, and the big thing that everyone says, is Christian Kirk went down. When Christian Kirk went down, Evan Ingram's receptions and targets skyrocketed, which is true. But if you eliminate those weeks that Christian Kirk went down, even the game that Christian Kirk went down early in that game, eliminate that game, Evan Ingram was still on pace for a 17-game, 90 reception season, which would have put him at tight end 3 in the league that year. And now everyone's saying, oh, there's more target competition on the way. Number one, there has been a lot of targets vacated on this offense, including Calvin Ridley's now in Tennessee. So you can scrap all of those target competitions that you had with him and replace it with Gabe Davis and Brian Thomas. Gabe Davis, never been a target guy. He's always been a field stretcher. He'll have his boom weeks. Maybe he'll be valuable in best ball, but he'll be really inconsistent. He's never had, in his pretty long career now, he's never had a 50 reception season. So I wouldn't call him a big target hawk. And Brian Thomas, rookie wide receiver out of LSU, was number 2 in LSU behind a generational talent, Malik Neighbors. I wouldn't be surprised, hot take, that Brian Thomas outperforms Malik Neighbors this year in fantasy football, not because of a talent thing, but just because of an opportunity thing. Sounds like he'll be the number 2, maybe the number 1 over Christian Kirk. Even if that is the case, I still think it'll be more of a lateral move in terms of how it'll affect Evan Ingram versus how it affected with Calvin Ridley on the football field. This is a rookie prospect. He's a little bit raw. He looked great in preseason, but I think we might see him grow throughout the season, and Evan Ingram will just be, from week 1, a staple of this offense. A tight end 8 price tag in best ball and in redraft. I'm totally happy in best ball drafting Evan Ingram and adding one more tight end with a different bye week later in the draft. I'm totally fine with that. And I'm totally fine with him being my only tight end in redraft managed leagues. I can pick somebody like Tyler Conklin off the scrap heap when I need a bye week or an injury with Evan Ingram occurs. I can make it work. I think it's going to be a top 5 tight end again this year. And there's really no reason that I would not think that. He's also just a great athlete. I can say that about all these guys. I try to be as statistical and as objective as possible, but subjectively, with my eyes, I think Evan Ingram is a stud wide receiver playing a tight end position. I think Xavier Worthy just has what it takes. We saw it in college, and I think we're going to see it in the NFL. We've already seen it in preseason and in training camp. And Anthony Richardson, his talent speaks for himself. He's got an absolute cannon for an arm. Even if it's not as strong as it was this year, coming off of the shoulder injury, he had some arm to lose. He has, I would say, probably the best arm outside of Joe Milton in the NFL right now. And as an athlete, he's the best. He's better than Lamar Jackson is at his point of his career right now. He's young, Anthony Richardson is. And from a talent point of view, I just believe in him. So honorable mention on the Jags. I think the Jags are just kind of across the board undervalued. We'll kind of see what's going on with Christian Kirk. He's got a little bit of a calf injury. He's been held out of preseason. Brian Thomas started over him in the first preseason game, so that was interesting. I don't expect that to kind of hold true throughout the whole season, even if Christian Kirk is just that kind of slot guy, that wide receiver 3 coming in on the field. I think he'll end up probably being the wide receiver 1 on this team again this year, because he was last year before he went down with his injury. And Brian Thomas, he's going right next to Evan Ingram, so it's tough for me to draft him sometimes. But if you're at that point of the draft and you only have like 2 or 3 wide receivers on your roster, definitely just take Brian Thomas and wait on tight end. Sometimes Evan Ingram will fall to the next round, which is great. Get a great value on him. But if you missed out on Evan Ingram, 2 more honorable mentions. David Njoku and Jake Ferguson are also going right after Evan Ingram in the next couple of rounds. So if you miss on him, just take one of those guys. They're also going to be studs. They're also going to soak up a bunch of targets. And for that reason, do not draft under any circumstances any of these premium tight ends at the cost that they're going. Who knows, maybe the value dips. I doubt it. I think people are just going to take those early tight ends and do your mock drafts. See what happens when you take one of those early tight ends. You're going to have a terrible deficit at the running back position. More likely, we'll have a terrible deficit at the wide receiver position. And I'd way rather take a premium quarterback wait on tight end, take Evan Ingram, David Njoku, Jake Ferguson, one of the three, and stack my wide receiver room full of guys. And if a good second running back falls to me, I'm happy to take a second running back and not wait on some of the sleepers that we'll talk about in a little bit. This is a great sleeper fantasy football draft this season for the running back position. So stay tuned for that. Please subscribe to the channel. Tell me what you think in the comments section. Tell me if you think I'm crazy. Please share it with your friend if you agree with me. And we'll see you next time.